Ellie woke up early in the morning to the insistent ringing of her alarm clock. She lazily extended her hand, turned off the signal, and lay there for a few seconds, getting used to waking up. It was still dark outside the window. The gray winter dawn was just beginning to appear on the horizon. Ellie turned her head on the pillow and looked at Jack sleeping next to her. Jack lay with his back to her, his breathing deep and regular. In the dimness of the bedroom, Ellie saw only his silhouette. She didn't want to get out of the warm blanket, but the day required attention. She carefully stood up, trying not to disturb her husband. As Ellie walked to the bathroom, she thought about the upcoming day. She needs to catch a morning meeting at the office and then get out early to prepare dinner in the evening. Today, they agreed to meet with friends Greg and Sarah. Informal home meeting, just sit together, order pizza, or cook something simple. They had not gathered in such a lineup for a long time, and Ellie was glad to have the opportunity to spend time with loved ones. When she returned to the bedroom, Jack was already sitting on the bed, awake. He rubbed his face with his palms, driving away the sleep. Hearing her steps, he looked up and smiled. "Good morning," he said hoarsely in a sleepy voice. "Is it time to get up already?" "Good," Ellie answered softly. "Yes, it's time. I need to leave early today." She walked over to the bed and lightly touched his shoulder. Jack covered her hand with his, warm and strong, and slightly squeezed her fingers. Usually at such moments, Ellie felt a surge of tenderness. But today, she seemed to catch a hint of concern on her husband's face. Maybe it just seemed like it. "Meeting again?" he asked, getting out of bed and following her into the kitchen. "Yes, it's a reporting period in our office," she responded, moving around the apartment and collecting her thoughts. They promised to start at the crack of dawn. She turned on the coffee machine and took 2 mugs out of the cabinet. Jack stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his wife refill their morning coffee. He had been working from home for the last couple of weeks. His company had introduced a mixed mode, and today was remote work day. This meant that he had nowhere to rush. "Will you have some coffee?" she asked out of habit, although she knew the answer. "Of course," he nodded. "Thank you." They drank coffee at the high kitchen table. Ellie talked about upcoming tasks at work, and Jack listened, sometimes nodding or asking clarifying questions. Outwardly, everything was as usual calm morning communication between the spouses. But when the conversation died down, Ellie caught a strange detachment in her husband's gaze. He looked out the window, twirling his empty mug in his fingers. "What are you thinking about?" she asked quietly. Jack snapped out of his thoughts, as if he had forgotten she was there. "Sorry, I overheard. Did you say something?" He turned his gaze to her and smiled tightly. "No, nothing," Ellie sighed. She felt slightly uneasy. It happened that he would become immersed in himself if there were problems at work or something else. "Everything is fine." Yes, yes, everything is fine," he answered too quickly. "I just didn't wake up completely. My head is still in the fog." He stood up and took the mug to the sink. Then he approached Ellie from behind and hugged her, lightly kissing the top of her head. "Don't worry, everything is fine," he said softly in her ear. "See you in the evening. I'll go get some groceries for dinner, okay?" The warm embrace eased her anxiety a little. She smiled and covered his arms with hers, wrapping them around her waist. "Fine. I'll try to come back early to get everything ready before the guys arrive." "Great," he responded. "I'm also looking forward to the evening. It's been a while since we got together." He let her go and turned to go get dressed. Ellie watched him leave the kitchen, and her gaze lingered on his back. There was something in Jack's intonation that she didn't fully understand, either nervousness or hidden excitement. Maybe he was really tired and didn't get enough sleep. Dispelling doubts, she went to get ready for work. Before leaving the house, Ellie quickly wrote Jack a note, reminding him to buy bread and wine for dinner. He had already gone into the shower, and she did not bother him. Putting on her coat and scarf, she looked out the window. It was frosty outside. Steam was coming from her mouth. Typical January Wednesday. On the way to the car, Ellie thought about the upcoming evening. Greg and Sarah are their close friends. Greg was Jack's classmate. They studied together in Boston and then simultaneously moved to this city for work. Since then, their friendship has only grown stronger. Sarah is a couple of years younger than them, cheerful and talkative. Ellie immediately became friends with her when they met. It seemed that Sarah was the perfect match for the serious and thoughtful Greg. She knew how to make people laugh and bring lightness. Over the past year, however, they have been able to gather less and less often. Work, affairs, all four had reasons to postpone meetings, but today it finally worked. Ellie really hoped that nothing would go wrong. She missed such cozy gatherings. She got into the car, started the engine, and turned on the heat. The gray streets slowly awakened to life. Ellie thought that she would have to come up with something to surprise the guests for dessert. Perhaps bake a signature apple pie. Everyone loved it. While the car warmed up, she quickly scrolled through her phone. The screen displayed a new message from Sarah, arriving late at night. "Hi, what will we drink in the evening? Greg and I can grab something. I'm so glad to finally see you." After reading this, Ellie smiled. Sarah was always the enthusiastic one in their company. Ellie quickly typed a response. "Hi, I thought about opening a bottle of red. If you want, take white or something else of your choice. I'm glad to see you in the evening." After sending the message, she put the phone aside and drove out of the yard. My mood improved with anticipation of meeting friends. If there was any vague concern about Jack's aloofness this morning, she decided not to dwell on it. We all need time to ourselves from time to time. Surely by the evening, he will be the same as always, a loving husband and the life of the party. In the evening, the apartment was filled with warm light and the aromas of home-cooked food. Ellie managed to prepare pasta and salad, and Jack, as promised, stopped by for fresh bread and a bottle of red wine. While her husband cut the baguette into neat slices, she arranged the plates and cutlery on the table. "Did you manage to do everything?" Jack asked, glancing at his watch. "They'll be coming soon." "Almost," Ellie responded, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. She was a little worried. She wanted the evening to go smoothly. "Thank you for going to the store." "You're welcome." Jack came up and kissed her on the cheek. "Everything will be fine." The doorbell rang and Ellie hurried to open it. Greg and Sarah stood on the threshold, wrapped in winter coats, their faces flushed from the cold. Sarah smiled widely as she held the package in her hands. "Hello, come in quickly," Ellie cordially invited, making way for them. "How did you get there?" "Hello, hello." "We're frozen like tzatziki," Sarah answered with a slight laugh, taking off her shoes in the hallway. "It's terribly cold outside." Greg shook hands with Jack, who came out to meet him, and hugged Ellie with one arm. "Hi, good to see you," he said sincerely. "The traffic jams are terrible, but we got out." "Come into the living room, undress, make yourself at home," Ellie smiled. She felt warm from their friendly energy. Sarah took off her coat, revealing a bright blue blouse underneath. Jack, taking her outerwear from her, noticeably held his gaze on her for a split second. Ellie caught it out of the corner of her eye. His gaze slid over Sarah's figure before he turned away, pretending to examine the coat before hanging it up. Ellie internally pulled herself together. There was nothing to invent. Jack simply politely helped the guest undress. Everyone went into the living room. Greg handed Ellie the package. "We grabbed pie for dessert. I hope you didn't bake your signature. I didn't want to compete." "What pie?" Sarah perked up, sitting down on the sofa. "Apple again?" "Greg, you chose the right one." "I guessed it," Greg laughed. "Your apple pie is a legend." Ellie accepted the package with gratitude. Inside was indeed a delicious pie from a local bakery. "Great, thank you. My apple pie next time, but today we'll try this one," she said. "We'll make tea or coffee later, just right." The friends sat around a low coffee table. Jack uncorked a bottle of wine and poured it into glasses. Sarah sat next to her husband, but said something, addressing mainly Jack. She gesticulated emotionally, recalling a funny incident at work, and everyone laughed together, imagining the situation described. "And just imagine, my boss comes in, and I'm completely lost with this pile of papers," Sarah said vividly, "and he looks and says, We're drowning in reports today, miss. I almost answered, no, I'm the sinking Titanic. Everyone started laughing. Ellie smiled, glad that the evening was going smoothly. Jack poured wine into Sarah's empty glass, and she nodded gratefully to him, lightly touching his hand with her fingers as she took the glass. Ellie noticed this briefly. The gesture seemed almost mechanical, friendly to her, but something pierced her. She was distracted, turning her attention to Greg. He talked about his recent business trip to Chicago, where his company was opening a branch. Greg worked as a development manager and frequently traveled around the country. I hope I won't go there again in the winter, he concluded jokingly, taking a sip of wine. The wind blower was just fierce, it almost carried me away to the lake. Yes, Chicago is harsh in winter, Jack agreed. Have you been traveling for a long time? For a week, Greg answered. I returned just a couple of weeks ago, before the new year. Sarah interjected, looking at her husband. I almost went crazy by myself then. It's good that friends helped not to get bored. She smiled warmly at Jack. By the way, Jack, my laptop is still working great after your life-saving visit. Thanks again, you helped me out. Ellie turned her gaze to her husband, raising her eyebrows in surprise. Did you fix Sarah's laptop? Jack hesitated a little, but nodded quickly. Oh yes, it was. Sarah called her Windows crashed, and Greg was just leaving. I stopped by after work and set everything up. How did I miss such a moment? Greg said to Sarah with slight reproach. Darling, you didn't tell me. You were busy, you were on video calls with your clients until late, Sarah shrugged. I decided not to distract you because of nonsense, so I turned to Jack. He's our computer genius. Greg grinned and patted Jack on the shoulder. Well, you helped out, brother. Thank you. Otherwise, I don't understand anything about these pieces of hardware. No question, Jack waved him off with a tight smile, glad to help. Ellie didn't say anything, but she felt strangely uneasy inside. She didn't remember Jack mentioning this story the other day. Perhaps I forgot to tell you. In the end, it's nothing special. I helped my friends. It's a big disaster. And yet, for some reason, she felt uneasy. The conversation moved on. They had dinner, laughed, and remembered old stories. The pasta was a success. Everyone praised Ellie's culinary talents. At some point, Jack and Sarah went to the kitchen together. He insisted that the guests rest while the hostess prepared tea for dessert and enticed Sarah to help him find tea leaves and cups. Ellie and Greg were left alone in the living room, putting the already made pie on plates. I'm glad we finally got out, Greg said quietly, leaning toward Ellie conspiratorially. Otherwise, it's completely screwed up. Life is a continuous race. Don't tell me, she agreed. I missed evenings like this. Greg smiled slightly and quietly added, Sarah misses you too. She kept asking when I would see you. Ellie glanced towards the kitchen, where Sarah's muffled voice and the sound of moving mugs could be heard. I remembered a fleeting scene of Sarah touching Jack's hand while accepting a glass of wine. Nonsense, of course, just a friendly gesture. And yet, yes, it's great that you came, Ellie said softly, returning her smile. We should try to meet more often. Soon everyone gathered around the table again with tea and pie. The evening came to an end in a cozy atmosphere. When the clock on the wall showed almost 10, Greg announced that they had to go. Tomorrow was a work day. Everyone began to rise. Thank you so much. Everything was very tasty, Sarah thanked, hugging Ellie goodbye. And thank you for the invitation. We had a wonderful time. You're always welcome, Ellie answered, sincerely hugging her friend. Let's do it again soon. Definitely don't disappear, Greg put in, putting on his coat. There's always a lot of things to do, but we forget our friendship. That's right, Jack supported him, taking Greg's coat from the table. Next time, maybe we'll go out to your place or into nature together. Ellie smiled. The prospect of new meetings warmed her soul. I wanted to believe that everything would continue to be fine for them. Jack patted Greg on the back at the door. Glad to see you, friend. Come on, good luck along the way. Good night to you too, Greg replied, putting on his coat. "Thank you for calling." When the door closed behind the friends, the apartment immediately seemed quiet. Ellie began collecting plates from the table. Jack leaned against the wall, watching her thoughtfully. "Good evening," he said, breaking the silence. "They are great guys." "Yes," Ellie nodded, collecting the glasses. "I'm glad everything went so well." Jack helped her carry the dishes into the kitchen. While Ellie loaded everything into the dishwasher, he stood nearby with his arms crossed over his chest. She glanced at him briefly. He seemed to be worried about something. "Let's go to bed," she suggested softly. "I'm incredibly tired today." "Yes, of course," Jack perked up, glancing at her briefly. "Let's go." The night covered the house with its usual peace, but a slight feeling of anxiety began to warm up in Ellie's chest again. She couldn't explain it at all. Either Jack's unusual absent-mindedness or the strange incident with the laptop. She tried to push away bad thoughts. After all, in essence, nothing bad happened. Her husband, a loved one, could be felt nearby as a warm presence. Ellie closed her eyes, telling herself that in the morning everything would seem stupid. She trusted Jack. They have a strong, honest relationship, isn't it? A couple of days passed after the friendly evening, and life returned to normal. However, Ellie did not leave a vague feeling of anxiety. Jack behaved as usual. He worked, joked, and watched TV series with her in the evening. But as soon as she thought about those little things, the look at Sarah, the story with the laptop, she began to feel uneasy. She tried not to get hung up on it and chalked it all up to her imagination. On Friday, after dinner, she and Jack were sitting on the sofa. There was a movie on TV, but Ellie was thinking more about her own things. She noticed that Jack barely touched her all evening. Previously, they usually sat side by side. He put his arm around her shoulders. Now he was sitting a little further away, holding the phone in his hands and chatting with someone. Ellie looked at the screen. He quickly pressed the lock key. The screen went dark. "What's interesting there?" she asked casually, pretending that her question was idle. "Eh?" "Nothing special," Jack responded. "A colleague writes at work and spams me with questions even in the evening." He placed the phone face down on the armrest and stretched. "The movie is boring. Maybe we should go to bed early," he suggested, standing up. Ellie nodded, although sleep did not come to her. She turned off the TV and followed into the bedroom. She wanted to ask who exactly wrote to him, but she swallowed the question. Night covered the house. Jack fell asleep almost immediately, turning to the wall. Ellie lay with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic tick-tock of the wall clock and occasional noises from the street. She thought about how they had grown apart over the past weeks. Maybe it's really work? Or does he have some kind of internal struggle of his own that he doesn't want to talk about? Closer to midnight, Ellie began to doze off. Suddenly, she felt Jack stirring nearby. His cell phone, lying on the nightstand, vibrated, flashing the screen. Jack sat up with a jerk and grabbed the phone. Ellie immediately woke up completely. "Who's there?" she asked sleepily, propping herself up on her elbow. "Nobody. I mean, sorry, it's for work," he muttered quickly and jumped out of bed. "I'll just be a minute. They're writing from the office. There's an urgent question." He almost ran out of the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Ellie froze, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. In the middle of the night, and suddenly, there are urgent work issues. She stole a glance at her watch, 0:07. It's a strange time for office correspondence. Does he really take her for a fool? Barely hearing the floorboards creak, Ellie stood up and walked to the door. She opened it a couple of centimeters. Jack's muffled voice came from the living room. He was clearly talking to someone on the phone in a low voice. The words were difficult to make out, but the intonation. She rarely heard such a tone from him, soft, soothing, as if he was pitying or convincing someone. "Everything will be fine, do you hear?" A quiet voice came to her. "Just be a little patient. I miss you too." Ellie felt her fingertips getting colder. She pressed her back against the wall next to the door, trying to stop shaking. Who's on the other end of the line? No, this was clearly not a business conversation. After a minute, Jack ended the call. His steps were heard. Ellie darted back into bed and pulled the covers up, pretending to be asleep. His heart was beating so loudly that he thought he would hear it. Jack returned to the bedroom. In the semi-darkness, she felt the mattress sag under his weight. He exhaled quietly, as if he was nervous too. Then he lay down carefully, trying not to disturb his wife. Ellie lay there, trying to breathe evenly. Thoughts were swirling in my head. I miss you too. These words rang the alarm bell. Who are they addressed to? Probably half an hour passed. Jack was asleep again, or pretending to be, his breathing even. Ellie didn't close her eyes. When she was sure that he would not notice, she silently got out from under the blanket and tiptoed out into the living room. He took Jack's phone back with him, but the laptop lay on the table. Jack often left it on. Ellie clicked her mouse, waking her laptop from sleep mode. The screen lit up. She knew the password to his account. They never hid such things from each other. There was no need for this before. Everything inside protested. This is essentially spying on your husband. But the explanation for the night call required an answer. She quickly went into his mail, nothing unusual, spam and mailings. Work messenger empty. Apparently, he was talking on a regular telephone. Ellie pressed her lips tightly together. Of course, he won't leave any traces if he's having a secret conversation. Her gaze accidentally fell on the open browser window. Facebook. Jack's page has scrolled through correspondence with someone. Ellie approached the screen with a sinking heart. The last dialogue was highlighted in personal messages. The name of the interlocutor did not immediately catch my eye. S. The avatar has a flower. Strange, does Jack correspond with someone under his initials? With trembling fingers, Ellie moved the cursor and clicked. The chat opened, and she saw several messages. Last lines. I feel so alone tonight. Reply from Jack. I'm here. Call me if you need to. And further from the interlocutor. I need to hear your voice. I miss you. Ellie covered her mouth with her hand, suppressing the moan that was about to escape. Everything was clear here without words. As Sarah? But why are there only initials and someone else's picture in the profile? Maybe to hide the correspondence. She read through the earlier messages, but there wasn't much. A couple of days earlier. When can I see you? Jack's response. Soon, I promise. The world swam before her eyes. Ellie hastily closed her laptop as if she had been burned. It became difficult for her to breathe. It seemed that a little more and a scream or sob would be heard. She closed her eyes, trying to control herself. It was a nightmare, but too obvious to deny. Jack corresponded with Sarah. They missed each other, wanted to see each other. This meant only one thing. Ellie sat on the sofa, wrapping her arms around herself. Everything inside was turning over. She remembered all the strange things of the last days, and here is the answer. God, is it really her husband and her closest friend? No, it's unbearable to believe in such a thing. My cheek, wet from tears, suddenly began to itch. Only then did she realize that she was crying. Tears flowed silently and profusely. Ellie sobbed softly, covering her mouth with her hand. A few minutes later, having gathered her will, she stood up. We need to go back to the bedroom and pretend nothing happened. At least until the morning. She has to figure it all out. Ellie carefully lay back down. Jack's back was still turned towards her. She wanted to scream, wake him up, and lay down all the accusations at once. But what will this give? Would he deny everything, dodge everything? Or, what's worse, would he calmly confirm everything? She wasn't ready to hear the truth from his lips that night. Instead, Ellie lay in the dark, staring at the wall with wide eyes. Has her world completely collapsed, or is there still hope for a mistake? The morning is wiser than the evening, but deep down she already knew the answer. In the morning, Ellie was in a grave, broken state. She did not sleep a wink, and now her face reflected a sleepless night's slightly swollen eyes, pale skin. In the bathroom, she tried to get herself in order. She washed her face with cold water and applied light makeup. You need to look normal so as not to arouse Jack's suspicion. She decided not to make a scene right away. First, understand what to do next. In the kitchen, Jack was already busy at the stove, frying eggs. Hearing his wife's steps, he turned around and smiled as usual, as if nothing had happened. "Hello, sleepyhead," he said softly. "How did you sleep?" Ellie felt a lump in her throat at the sound of his voice. Just yesterday, she would have responded with a joke, but now she could barely restrain herself from bursting into tears. She looked down, opening the refrigerator. "Yeah, not really," she squeezed out, taking out a carton of milk. "My head hurts a little." "Migraine again." Jack sympathized and turned off the stove. "Maybe you shouldn't go to work today. I would like to rest." Ellie shook her head. She couldn't bear to be alone with him at home. It's better to leave and pretend that everything is as usual. "No, I need to finish something on the project," she replied. "I'll take a pill and it'll be fine." She walked to the table and sat down. Jack placed a plate of omelet in front of her and carefully poured orange juice. Usually little things like this touched her. Now Ellie seemed to be watching from the side a scene from someone else's life. Here is a loving husband preparing her breakfast. And here is the same husband whispering words of love to another in the middle of the night. My hands shook involuntarily. She clasped them in her lap to hide her trembling. "Elle, are you sure you're okay?" Jack sat down next to her, looking into her face. "You're kind of pale." Ellie forced herself to look into his eyes. Relatives, brown ones, in the corners light wrinkles from smiles. For how many years she drowned in them, believing every shine, and how skillfully he hid the betrayal from her. "I'm telling you, I didn't get enough sleep," she said, trying to give confidence to her voice. "Everything has piled up." "Let's go to bed early this evening," he suggested. "We can cancel the movie, just rest." She just nodded and looked down at her plate. "I didn't feel like eating at all, but I had to pretend." Ellie broke off a piece of toast and began chewing mechanically. Jack was saying something about his plans for the day, but she barely heard him. "My thoughts were noisy. How could you? Why, Sarah? How long does this last? What should I do now?" I wanted to scream, but she was silent, only nodding occasionally, as if she was listening. Soon she managed to quietly retreat, citing a headache. She hid in the bathroom, closing the door with a latch, and gave free rein to her tears. Silently, so he wouldn't hear. Tears burned in my eyes and rolled down my cheeks into the sink. Ellie bit her fist to keep from crying out loud. One thought was pulsating in my head. This is really happening. When she left, Jack was already getting ready. He kissed her forehead goodbye, and Ellie forced herself not to shrink back. "Take care of yourself, okay?" he said tenderly. "Call if it gets worse." She nodded again, unable to get out an answer. He left, closing the door behind him. As soon as his footsteps faded on the stairs, Ellie felt that she could no longer control herself. She was shaking violently. She sank onto the sofa, clutching a pillow to her chest like a life preserver. The house was empty and immediately ceased to be a home. It turned into the decoration of a lie. What should I do? Pounding in my temples. Scream? Rush to Sarah and rip off the masks? Should I call Greg right now? Or forgive? Pretend like you don't know anything and hope it's just a mistake? No, it won't work. She felt the knife in her back too keenly to pretend any longer, but she was also afraid to act rashly. Ellie forced herself to stand. You need to distract yourself, otherwise she will go crazy. She went to work, although thoughts about projects were the last thing on her mind right now. The whole day passed in a blur. Colleagues asked her a couple of times if everything was okay, noting her unusual silence. Ellie used the excuse of feeling unwell. Returning home in the evening, she found silence. Jack hasn't arrived yet. Usually he finished before her and was already home. My heart skipped a beat. Where is he now? With whom? Barely suppressing panic, Ellie walked into the bedroom and fell on the bed. The phone showed the absence of any messages from my husband. Neither, "How are you?" nor, "When will you be?" If before he was always interested in how she got there, today nothing. Probably busy, she thought bitterly, or not alone. Half an hour later, the front door finally clicked, and there were footsteps. Ellie quickly sat up, trying to pull herself together. "Hi," she responded more cheerfully than she felt when Jack looked into the bedroom. "Hello. You're already home." He looked a little surprised. "How's your headache?" "Better," she replied. "Are you late today?" Jack looked away for a second, then casually said, "Yes, I had to stay late. We called the Western office. There is a couple of hours difference." How easily this lie escaped him. Ellie looked at him and saw a stranger, but she just nodded. "I was thinking, maybe we should order some food. What can you say about Chinese cuisine?" "Go ahead," she agreed in a colorless voice. The evening passed tensely. They spoke little. Ellie cited fatigue and went to bed early, locking herself in the guest room. This was the first time in all the years of marriage that he slept separately, and Jack was clearly alarmed. He knocked on her door when she was already lying down. "Elle, everything is fine." A muffled voice came from behind the door. "Yes, I'm just more comfortable there," she answered after a pause. "I don't want to disturb you in case I'm tossing and turning because of a migraine." He paused. She thought he was going to object, but no. "Okay, good night," he said quietly. "Calm," she answered and closed her eyes, although sleep was again not in any corner of her exhausted mind. In the darkness, tears found her again. Ellie cried silently, burying her face in the pillow. Happy episodes that now seemed like deception kept creeping into my memory. Here she is with Jack on vacation last summer on the coast. He laughs, tossing her in his arms in the surf. Then Ellie thought she was loved and protected, and now he understands. Perhaps even then there was a lie in his heart. Here is the new year. Jack gives her a pendant and kisses her as the chimes strike. "I love you," he whispered then. Did those words really mean nothing? Her entire past has crumbled into fragments, like a broken mirror, in which not a single spark of former happiness can no longer be seen. As morning approached, she wiped her red eyes and sat up in bed. The tears ended, only bitter determination remained. This cannot continue. She must do something. Ellie turned on the night light and picked up the phone. Her fingers found the name she settled on in her contact list. Everything inside her tightened with anticipation, but she pressed call. The beeps continued endlessly. Finally, the sleepy voice on the other end of the line answered. "Ellie? Hello? What happened?" It was Greg. Greg sat in the kitchen in the dark, clutching his mug of cold coffee with his hands. Dawn was breaking outside the window. After Ellie's call, sleep was gone. Her worried voice continued to ring in his ears. She asked to meet as soon as possible and said that the matter was serious and concerning. Sarah and Jack. At first, Greg couldn't believe his ears. Ellie barely spoke. Her voice was trembling. He immediately offered to go to their home, but she refused. She insisted on meeting on neutral territory in a couple of hours in a small park next to their house. Greg got up earlier than usual while Sarah was still sleeping. He couldn't wait to hear what Ellie had to say. My heart ached with forebodings. It concerned Sarah and Jack. These words were spinning in my head, causing nausea. Is there really some kind of trouble? No, then Ellie wouldn't have delayed it. She would have said it right away. There was another explanation, from which Greg chased his thoughts away like an annoying fly. It couldn't be. No, he trusted his wife. He trusted his best friend. It would be unthinkable. Sarah stirred in the bedroom, and Greg perked up. He didn't want to wake her up, so he decided to leave a note that he was going for a run. Pulling on his sports jacket, he quietly left the apartment. Half an hour later, he was already waiting for Ellie at the appointed place on a bench in the park. The frosty air stung my cheeks, and clouds of steam escaped from my mouth. Greg took a couple of steps away, stamping his feet, trying to keep warm and cope with his growing anxiety. Finally, in the distance, he saw a familiar silhouette. Ellie walked quickly between the bare winter trees, wrapping herself in a coat. Her face, even from a distance, seemed pale. Greg moved forward. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. "Ellie," he called quietly, looking around. At this early hour, the park was almost empty. She came up and stopped opposite. They looked at each other in silence for several seconds. Greg noticed that her eyes were red, as if she had been crying for a long time. My chest felt cold. "What's happened?" He finally exhaled. "You're scaring me." Ellie looked around, checking if there were strangers nearby. Then she said slowly, "Greg, I... I'm sorry it happened like this, but I couldn't do it alone." The voice broke. She pressed her hand to her lips, trying to control her emotions. Greg went cold. He gently touched her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. Sit down." He led her to the bench. "Speak no matter what." Ellie sat down on the cold wooden bench. Greg sat down next to her, turning her towards him. He desperately wanted to hear what was troubling his friend, and no matter how terrible the truth was, to find out. I know that Jack and Sarah are deceiving us," Ellie finally said and covered her face with her hands. "They are having an affair." Greg felt like he had been punched in the gut. He involuntarily pulled back, looking at her in disbelief. "What? What did you say?" he croaked. Ellie lowered her hands, tears glistening on her cheeks. "I didn't want to believe, but I saw it with my own eyes." Correspondence, and heard a conversation. She spoke confusingly, but tried to convey the main thing. "This night, Jack. He was talking on the phone. He thought I was sleeping. He was talking to Sarah, Greg." Greg stared at her, white-faced. "There was a noise in my head. The first reaction is no, this cannot be. Sarah couldn't. Jack couldn't. But Ellie wasn't prone to fantasies. And her condition, now it's unlikely that she was mistaken." "Are you sure?" he asked hoarsely, still hoping for a mistake. "Maybe this is some kind of misunderstanding." "I wish I was wrong," she whispered. "I saw the messages. They wrote that they missed each other. They agreed to meet." She pulled the phone out of her pocket. The screen lit up and Greg saw a photo, a screenshot of the correspondence. My heart skipped a beat. There really was a chat in the messenger. Phrases: "I miss you. When can I see you?" The sender's name has been hidden with an S. He recognized the Facebook Messenger interface. In the right corner is Jack's profile icon, so this is from his account. Greg closed his eyes for a moment. Reality rained down on him with icy water from all sides. "Lord," he blurted out, "can't be." Ellie cried quietly next to her, biting her lip so as not to cry louder. Greg hugged her, holding her close to him like a sister. He himself didn't notice how his eyes stung, but instead of tears, something else grew inside: rage. Episodes flashed before my mind's eye. Sarah says that she will stay at her friend's. Jack cancels a meeting at the bar because there's a problem at work. Sarah, smiling absently at him, but as soon as her phone rang, she went out into another room. 1,000 little things that he did not pay attention to or trusted the explanations. For example, how a couple of weeks ago Sarah returned from a bachelorette party with a subtle smell of men's cologne on her coat. Then Greg decided that it was just his imagination. Or how I once found a package of expensive chocolate in her car that I didn't give as a gift, but she easily laughed it off, saying that a colleague had given it to her. Now these details formed into a single monstrous picture. Ellie straightened up, wiping her eyes. Greg saw her expression change. Now there was determination and bitterness in it. "What are we going to do?" she asked almost in a whisper. "I don't want to live a lie one more day, but also to create a scandal without a plan." Greg clenched his fists. He had an unbearable desire to immediately rush home, wake up Sarah and demand an explanation, or go to Jack and hit him hard. Betrayal by your best friend, bitterness mixed with rage. "Those bastards," he hissed through his teeth, then looked at Ellie. "Sorry." She just nodded. Her face was pale, but surprisingly calm. Now apparently all the tears had been cried. "I feel the same," she said quietly, "but we need to not act rashly. Otherwise they will turn away." "You're right," Greg exhaled, trying to calm his anger. "They need to tuck their tails in real tight." He stood up and walked back and forth in front of the bench. A plan was frantically forming in my head. "Listen, next weekend, I think, is a good time," he suddenly said, pausing. "I can pretend that I'm leaving on an urgent business trip on Saturday, Sunday, I'll say that the authorities are sending it. Ellie nodded, listening intently. She'll be left alone at home, thinking I'm gone, Greg continued gloomily. If she and Jack are having an affair, they will probably want to take the opportunity to meet. Yes, most likely, Ellie agreed quietly. You need a reason to leave too, Greg said, to make Jack feel free. I'll say that the company is sending me to training this weekend, Ellie decided after a pause. We periodically have on-site training, he won't suspect it. Greg clenched his hand into a fist and hit the palm of his other hand. Damn, how disgusting all this is, he muttered, but this way we'll catch them red-handed. We have to be absolutely sure, Ellie whispered, as if convincing herself to survive the upcoming nightmare. And then they'll dance with me, Greg finished gloomily. He looked at Ellie with a mixture of sympathy and determination. Hold on, he said softly. I know you're in hellish pain right now. Me too, but we can handle it. Ellie nodded. For a moment, she impulsively hugged him, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, that you believe me, for not leaving me alone. We'll get through this, Greg replied, stroking her back in a reassuring gesture. He felt her fragile body trembling subtly under her coat. After a minute, they pulled away. There was a new firmness in Ellie's eyes. See you on Saturday, she said. We need to think through everything. Greg nodded. They agreed to keep in touch and discuss the plan in detail closer to the point so that nothing would go wrong. When Ellie left, Greg was left standing in the silent park. The winter sun timidly made its way through the gray clouds. He clenched his teeth until his jaw hurt, experiencing the whole range of feelings from burning resentment to angry determination. In a week, his life could explode. But it can't be worse than this painful uncertainty and lies. The main thing is to find out the truth to the end and force the perpetrators to answer. No right to forgiveness. Jack stood near the window of his office, fiddling with his mobile phone in his hands. A new message from Ellie was displayed on the screen. She notified that she would be absent on Saturday, and Sunday the company was sending her to on-site training. Jack read these lines and felt a strange relief, and at the same time a pang of conscience. Relief because the upcoming weekend offered long-awaited freedom for him and Sarah. His conscience was sharp. Ellie did not suspect anything and, as always, warned him in advance, carefully wondering if he would be lonely at home. In response, he even joked for the sake of credibility. They say he will finally get some sleep in a bachelor's environment. His heart sank from the lie, but Jack quickly drove away the unpleasant thoughts. He typed a message to Sarah. Ellie is going away for the weekend. Greg seems to be away too. We are free. The answer came almost instantly. Yes, I can't believe we'll finally be alone for more than a few hours. Then an emoji was added, happy and heart. Jack couldn't help but smile at the screen. He looked around. His colleagues were busy with their own affairs. No one was paying attention. Then he quickly typed, meet me at our place for lunch. A minute later, Sarah, of course, my love. I can't wait. Darling. This word sparked a warm feeling in his chest. With Sarah, it had been easy and good for him for so long. Jack tidied up the papers on the table and looked at his watch. There were 10 minutes left until the lunch break. He tried to concentrate on the last task, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. Finally, after waiting until noon, he got up and, telling his colleague that he would be back in an hour, left the office. She and Sarah met in a small park not far from her work. This has been their secret place for the last couple of months, a quiet square with an inconspicuous cafe where you can get coffee to go. Sarah was already waiting on the bench, wrapped in a long coat. At the sight of Jack, she jumped up, her eyes lit up with joy. He approached, looking around, and immediately embraced her in a short but strong hug. Sarah gave him a quick peck on the cheek. Hello, she breathed with a smile. How I miss you. It's only been 3 days, Jack answered quietly, looking into her face. No one passed nearby, but he still kept his voice low. How are you? Sarah shrugged and took the glass of coffee from his hand. He had grabbed 2 on the way. Thank you. Yes, it's fine. It's great now. She lightly touched his fingers with hers, accepting the glass. And you? Jack looked at her carefully. Her cheeks turned pink in the cold, and a half-smile touched her lips. Such dear features. How did he even live without her before? Me too now, he said, answering with a smile. So, Saturday and Sunday, we are free. Sarah nodded, taking a sip of her hot coffee. Greg also said this morning that he was flying out on business for the weekend, she said in a low voice, shaking her head. It's a strange coincidence, right? Yes, but fate itself helps us. Jack grinned, although he was also surprised. The main thing is not to miss the chance. Sarah looked into his eyes seriously. Are you staying the night? Not like before a couple of stolen hours, but really together. Jack heard a hint of uncertainty in her voice. He gently touched her cheek with a warm palm. Of course, honey. I plan to spend as much time as we can with you, he assured quietly, at least all weekend long. Sarah closed her eyes, resting her cheek against his palm for a moment. Then she asked almost in a whisper, Do you think, will we ever be able to not hide? Jack lowered his hand and sighed tensely. This is not the first time this question has come up. It was not easy for Sarah to hide everything, and neither was it for him. But the thought of destroying the family, he couldn't make up his mind yet. I don't know, he answered honestly. So far there is so much, but I know for sure that I don't want to lose you. Sarah's eyes watered. She blinked quickly and looked away. I don't want to lose you either, she whispered, but the double life also exhausts me. Jack was silent, unable to find words. He looked at her guiltily. This situation was largely his responsibility. He was the first to give vent to his feelings, although he should have stopped. Yes, I probably should have. But he fell in love, like a boy, with this bright, lively woman. And now I couldn't imagine a day without her messages, without her laughter. Be patient a little longer, he asked quietly. We'll see there. Maybe we'll decide to change everything. But not now. Sarah nodded, wiping the corners of her eyes. She tried to smile. Okay, let's not talk about that now, she said humbly. We have 2 days of happiness ahead of us. I have already booked a room at a country hotel. Do you remember where we were last time? It's calm there. Jack nodded, remembering the cozy hotel by the lake where they once spent an evening together under the pretext of a business trip. Great. Are we leaving on Saturday morning then? He asked. Yes, at 10 o'clock, so we can check in early, Sarah confirmed. She perked up again, talking about the details. I'll tell Greg that I have to stay with a friend until Sunday. He'll still think I'm at a bachelorette party. Jack chuckled. Sarah bit her lip, guilt showing on her face. I'm so ashamed to deceive them. She blurted out, Ellie is so kind. Greg, he's good. Not now, Jack stopped her gently, taking her hand again. We have already made all the decisions. She nodded, trying to push away the pangs of conscience. They knew what they were getting into. Jack looked at his watch and sighed. It's time for me to go back, otherwise they'll miss me. Sarah hugged him sharply, pressing her whole body under his coat. See you Saturday, she whispered into his neck. Don't change your mind, do you hear? He squeezed her tighter in response. No way. As he let her go, he felt his heart pounding. A couple more days, and they will be together. Jack turned and walked away, trying to remain calm. It was alarmingly sweet in my soul. He convinced himself that everything was under control. Nobody will know anything. All precautions have been taken. There is nothing left, and she and Sarah can belong to each other, at least for a short time, without looking back. On Saturday morning, Ellie stood at a deserted gas station at the exit of the city, fiddling with her phone in her hands. The cold wind penetrated under her jacket, but she hardly felt it. Everything inside was burning with nervous tension. Greg called her a quarter of an hour ago. He confirmed that Jack had stopped by Sarah's house, and now they were most likely heading somewhere together. Ellie left the city early and waited for Greg to catch up with them. Greg's car appeared in the distance along the highway. He flashed his headlights. Ellie quickly got into her car and followed behind. So, two cars moved along the highway behind Jack's gray sedan, keeping a respectful distance. Are they sure they won't notice us? Ellie asked quietly into the phone, which was connected to the speakerphone. Hardly, Greg responded from the other end. I'm staying away. The main thing is that we didn't miss them. Ellie looked at the taillights flickering in the distance. My heart was pounding in my chest. She saw Sarah's light silhouette in the passenger seat ahead. Even from a distance, the understanding that it was she who was sitting next to Jack cut to the quick. Ellie squeezed the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road. Jack's car drove them further and further out of the city. After 40 minutes of driving, she turned onto a secondary road leading to a country lake. Ellie recognized the direction as a small resort hotel popular with couples looking for privacy. Greg also apparently understood. He cursed under his breath, but the connection transmitted his voice. Damn, they're going to the hotel. Ellie only clenched her teeth tighter. Someone else's words from the correspondence flashed in my head. I booked a room in a country hotel. Apparently, Sarah was eager to spend a romantic weekend. They kept a cautious distance. Finally, at the entrance to the hotel, Greg fell behind, allowing Jack's car to disappear behind the gate. Then he smoothly turned into the parking lot, signaling for Ellie to follow. The hotel looked quiet, a low building at the very edge of a frozen lake, surrounded by a pine forest. There were few guests this season. Jack's gray sedan stood out in the nearly empty parking lot. Ellie parked next to Greg, away from Jack's car. They quickly left. Greg frowned as he looked around the area. Looks like they're inside, he said. We need to find out the room number. Ellie nodded, feeling her legs give way. She felt on the verge of fainting, but held on with all her strength. Together, they entered the hotel lobby. The administrator behind the counter looked at them in surprise, probably their sloppy appearance. They were driving hastily, without preparation, and tense faces attracted attention. Greg quickly took the initiative, moving closer. Hello, he began in a businesslike tone. Excuse me, we are looking for our friends who were supposed to arrive here this morning. They seem to have left their phone at home, and we would like to find them. A young couple, a tall brunette and a blonde, perhaps checked in an hour ago. Ellie stood a little behind, her eyes downcast, and she was trembling slightly. The administrator hesitated. Just a minute, we don't have many races today. Yes, indeed, we checked in at 10:30. John Smith and wife. Greg grinned evilly. Jack even used someone else's name. That's right, John, Greg nodded meaningfully. Can you tell me what number? Sorry, but I can't provide. The employee began. Suddenly, Ellie stepped forward, looking at the administrator with despair. Please, this is very important. There were tears in her eyes. Her voice became hoarse. This is my husband. The young man behind the counter blinked in confusion, apparently catching the awkwardness of the situation. His cheeks turned red. Number 12, second floor, stairs to the right, he muttered. But Greg didn't wait for the end of the sentence. He was already heading towards the stairs with a quick, springy step. Ellie followed him, her heart ready to jump out. They almost ran along the second-floor corridor. The right door was found immediately. Muffled voices could be heard behind her. Greg didn't hesitate for a second. He leaned his shoulder on the door, simultaneously pulling the handle. The castle did not give in. A surprised voice was heard from inside. Knock. Did you hear? Greg hit the door again. It was no use. It was locked. Then he loudly, breaking into a scream, barked. Jack, open up, you bastard. There was silence inside for a moment. Then a familiar voice responded hesitantly. Greg, it's you. You guessed it, bastard, Greg shouted, feeling rage clouding his eyes. Open it now, or I'll kick the hell out of the door. Ellie stood a little further away, her hand to her mouth. She was shaking. Hearing her husband's voice behind the wall, she found herself wanting to both run and break in after Greg. Give it a like if you think Greg will force them to tell the truth now, and subscribe to the channel. This meeting can become a point of no return for everyone. There were hurried sounds behind the door, as if someone was hastily rummaging around the room. Finally, the lock clicked. The door opened slightly. Jack appeared on the threshold, barefoot and hastily throwing on his shirt. His face was white. "What? What are you doing here?" he managed, looking at Greg with wide eyes. Greg didn't respond with words. He pushed the door, throwing it wide open. Jack stepped back to let him inside. Ellie came in next. For a second, time froze. Now she sees in front of her the interior of a small room, rumpled bedding on a double bed, and Sarah, wrapped in a blanket, sitting on the edge of that very bed. Sarah's face was distorted with horror and shame. "Ellie," she whispered, her eyes instantly filling with tears. Ellie looked at this picture, feeling as if she was being burned from the inside with a hot iron. My chest felt tight, and there was not enough air. Jack raised his hands, trying to speak. "Listen, this." Greg didn't let him finish. "Greg, don't," Sarah screamed, jumping up, still wrapped in the blanket. She rushed to her husband. "Stop it, stop." Greg turned to her, and Sarah recoiled, meeting his gaze, full of rage. "Stop it. You've been lying to my face for so many months." He shook off her hand. Sarah began to cry, turning away. Jack stood up. "Greg," he began in a hoarse voice, I'm sorry." But Greg rushed forward again. "Sorry?" Greg shouted, not hearing anything, blinded by rage. "I trusted you like a brother. Enough." Ellie finally woke up and rushed forward. "Greg, please don't." Tears flowed down her cheeks. Her heart was breaking every second. Greg was breathing heavily, but allowed himself to be pulled back a step. Sarah knelt down next to him, hugging his shoulders and trying to keep him from another blow of fate. There was despair in her eyes. "I'm sorry. Forgive me," she sobbed, looking at Greg. "Please." Greg wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, peering at his wife, this unfamiliar woman, as it now seemed to him. "Sorry?" He smiled bitterly, his voice breaking. "No, Sarah. You have no right to ask for forgiveness. Neither you nor him." Ellie stood slightly behind, her hands pressed to her chest. Tears blurred her vision, but she heard these words like the sound of a gong. There is no right to ask for forgiveness. Yes, that's exactly how she felt. Jack, meanwhile, cleared his throat and raised his head. He looked at Ellie, his eyes shining with tears and pain. She perked up at the sound of his voice and stepped closer. It seemed to her that she should say something, give away all the storm that was rushing out. But my throat was tight and not a sound came out. "Ellie, I have no words." Jack croaked. Don't you dare," she suddenly interrupted quietly but sharply. "Don't even dare say anything." She looked at her husband, now clearly ex-husband, as she understood in her heart, and did not recognize him. The man she had loved for so many years seemed alien, pathetic in his plea. Sarah turned to her too, sobbing. "Ellie, please believe me, I didn't mean. We didn't want to hurt you." Ellie laughed bitterly through her tears, taking a step back towards the door. "Didn't want to hurt you." Her voice trembled, but steel was heard in it. "You destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it." "Al, please," Jack began, trying to get up. Greg stepped forward, and Jack froze, fearing another blow. "Leave her alone," Greg muttered angrily. "And it concerns you too," he said to Sarah. Sarah just sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Ellie grabbed the doorknob with her hand, trying to maintain at least some composure. "I don't want to hear you see." "Nothing," she said separately, looking in front of her, unable to look any longer at this shameful picture. "We're leaving." Greg nodded silently. He headed towards the exit. Ellie, without turning around again, stepped after. Right at the threshold, she stopped for a moment, trembling all over. "There is no forgiveness for both of you," she whispered, without turning around, but knowing that they could hear. And she went out into the corridor, slamming door number 12 behind her with such force that it shook in the frame. In the hotel parking lot, the air was icy cold. Ellie and Greg walked silently to their cars like sleepwalkers. Both were shocked by what happened. Ellie's ears were still filled with screams, blows, and sobs. The scene in the room was repeated before her eyes, as if in reality. She took a few steps, then felt that her legs could no longer hold her up. Leaning against the fender of her car, Ellie bent over, gulping air. She shuddered and vomited on the snow near the wheel. Shaking with spasms, she heard Greg hurriedly approach. Ellie. He carefully put his arm around her shoulders, supporting her. Quietly, that's it. She straightened up, wiping her wet lips with the back of her hand. Tears ran from her eyes again in streams. Greg took a handkerchief from his pocket and awkwardly handed it to her. Ellie accepted and dabbed her face, trying to stop shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "There's nothing to apologize for," he replied softly. Greg himself looked pale, as if after a heavy blow. The knuckles of his right hand were cut. Ellie nodded towards his hand. "At your place." Greg looked distantly, as if he was just now noticing the pain. "Nonsense, it will heal," he muttered. They fell silent. There was not a soul around, just their two cars and a couple of crows on a lamppost. Ellie looked back at the hotel building. Somewhere there, behind the walls, Jack and Sarah remained. When she thought about this, her chest felt tight again. Greg followed her gaze and asked quietly, "How are you? Holding up?" Ellie shook her head. To say okay would be a ridiculous lie. "I don't know," she said. The voice was hoarse from screaming and tears. "Everything is like a bad dream." Greg nodded slowly. He put his good hand in his pocket, as if he also didn't know what to do with himself. "At least everything is clear now," he said dully. Ellie smiled bitterly through her tears. "Yeah, that's enough." She covered her face with her hands for a moment, trying to compose herself. Then she straightened up and looked Greg in the eyes. Pain, guilt, and sympathy were mixed in his gaze. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly. Greg clenched his jaw. He was silent for some time, then said firmly, "I'll go home. I'll pack Sarah's things. Throw them to hell. I can't wait for her at home." His voice trembled at the last words, but he quickly pulled himself together. "And you?" he asked. Ellie closed her sore eyes. Home. Jack and his cozy home, which now seemed desecrated. She couldn't bear the thought of having to re-enter a place where everything reminded them of their past life. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Probably. I'll go to my friends. I can't see him now. I can't be there." Greg nodded, showing understanding. "You can, if you want." He began hesitantly. "You can stay with me for a couple of days, so that you don't have to be alone." Ellie looked at him gratefully, but shook her head. "Thank you, but no need. I have a colleague, a good friend. I'll call her. I think I can stay with her for the first time." "Okay, whatever you decide," Greg responded. They fell silent again. There was too much of everything, and at the same time emptiness. Ellie felt that she was standing on the edge of an abyss. The unknown lay ahead. Her whole old life has just collapsed, and it's unclear how to live on. "What do you think?" Suddenly escaped her lips. "Why?" The voice trembled from powerlessness. Greg just shook his head. "I don't know, Ellie," he said dully. "I'll probably never understand." She sobbed, and he automatically hugged her, holding her close to him. Ellie rested her forehead on his shoulder, letting her tears flow once again. They stood for several minutes, united in their grief, until the acute attacks subsided. Finally, she pulled away, wiping her face with a handkerchief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Greg smiled sadly out of the corner of his mouth. "Thank you. I've been blind for so long." Ellie winced at these words. The betrayal was too fresh. "We should probably go," she said quietly. "There's nothing more here." Greg nodded. He took a couple of steps towards his car, then turned around. "Are you sure you can get there? Maybe we can go together." Ellie assessed her own condition, shabby but conscious. "I can handle it. I'll go slowly. Don't worry." "Fine. I'll be in touch then, okay?" he said, opening the door. "Call me when you get settled. And if you need anything, I can do it right away." "Okay," she nodded. They exchanged knowing glances. Then Greg got into the car. The engine purred and his car rolled smoothly towards the exit of the parking lot. Ellie was left alone for a moment under the gray winter sky. She looked back at the hotel again. No movement was visible in the second-floor windows. Neither Jack nor Sarah followed them. What difference would it make? She thought bitterly. She had already heard everything she needed to. Now their paths diverged. Ellie got into the car. Her hands were still shaking, but she took a deep breath and exhaled. You need to hold on, at least to get to the city. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time she felt relief. Pain and rage raged inside her, but beneath them there was a tiny feeling. It couldn't get any worse. Yes, it will be difficult, but she will survive. And Greg will be fine too, he should be. As the road rolled past the hood, Ellie tried not to think about Jack or Sarah. She had other worries ahead: where to live, how to explain everything to her family, what to do with work, marriage. She didn't even notice how the phone on the next seat vibrated several times, flashing the name Jack. Ellie didn't want to hear his voice anymore. Not today, not ever. That evening she found shelter with her friend Molly, the same colleague to whom she often turned for advice. Without further ado, Molly made a bed for her in the guest room and gave her hot chamomile tea. Ellie hardly spoke. She had no strength left. She just sat, wrapped in a blanket, and looked at one point until Molly persuaded her to try to sleep. That night Ellie had nightmares whenever she closed her eyes. She woke up several times in a cold sweat. In the morning, the exhausted body completely shut down. When Ellie opened her eyes, the gray winter dawn of a new day was dawning outside the window. My heart skipped a beat as soon as I realized the reality. This was not a dream. Everything that happened was real. But next to her, on the edge of the bed, Molly dozed off, holding her hand. This quiet support meant a lot to Ellie now. She carefully released her hand so as not to wake her friend. Jack sat on the edge of the same bed where an hour ago he and Sarah were happy and carefree. Now the bedspread was crumpled. The pillow was lying on the floor. There was a sharp taste of disaster in the air. Nearby, Sarah was pulling on her jeans, hastily wiping away tears with the back of her hand. Both were silent, aggravated by what had happened. Finally, Jack picked up the phone from the nightstand and dialed Ellie's number with trembling fingers. Beeps. More. There was no answer. He tried again, the same result. She doesn't answer the phone. Sarah asked barely audibly, buttoning her jacket over her t-shirt. Jack shook his head, his eyes filled with dull horror. No, he whispered, and I'm afraid he won't take it. Sarah sobbed and burst into tears again, covering her face with her hands. Jack mechanically rubbed his bruised cheekbone. Greg's blows made his face throb with pain, but it hurt much worse inside. "What have we done?" he said into the void. Sarah didn't answer, just rocked back and forth, sitting on a chair against the wall. Jack understood that something had to be done. You can't stay here. They should go back and try to explain themselves, apologize. But what kind of apologies can heal this? He stood up, feeling dizzy. In the bathroom, he automatically splashed cold water on his face. A pathetic sight was reflected in the mirror. "We need to get out of here," he said hoarsely, walking back to Sarah. "Let's look for them at home." Sarah lowered her hands and looked at him with reddened eyes. "Do you think they will listen to us?" she asked bitterly. "I don't know," Jack answered honestly. "But I have to try to talk to Ellie. Should at least." He didn't finish, but Sarah understood. She nodded and stood up. A quarter of an hour later, they were already leaving the hotel parking lot. Jack drove the car back to town, having difficulty concentrating on the road. Sarah sat quietly, staring out the window. Sometimes she sobbed, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she suddenly said, without taking her eyes off the passing trees. "Stop it," Jack responded dully, without turning his head. "We're both to blame." We drove in silence for several minutes. Then Sarah spoke again, confused, as if thinking out loud. "What will happen now? Greg, he will never forgive. I know him. He's probably already. Oh God." She covered her face with her hands. Jack didn't answer. He also doubted that Ellie would be able to forgive. The sight of her eyes at that moment, devastated and cold, stood before him all the time. Maybe, maybe they will cool down over time, Sarah said weakly, as if hoping to convince herself. Jack gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. I don't know, Sarah, he managed. Don't know. Soon the city streets surrounded them again. Jack first took Sarah to her house. The road passed in silence. As soon as the car stopped, Sarah looked at him pleadingly. Will you? Come later. Jack looked away. I need to find Ellie, he answered quietly. Sarah nodded, trying not to show offense. I see, she whispered. Later then, we'll call you. She got out of the car, quietly closing the door. Jack noticed the way her shoulders hunched as she walked up the porch. A brief desire to rush after her, to console him, flashed through him, but he suppressed it. Now he could only think about one thing: his wife. Jack turned the car around and rushed towards his house. As we approached the quiet suburban neighborhood, my heart sank. Ellie's car was parked in the driveway in front of the house. He rushed out, barely stopping at the curb. Ellie, he called, running up the steps of the porch. The door was locked. He fumbled in his pockets for the keys, but remembered that they were left in his jacket, abandoned at the hotel. I had to press the bell. Silence. He knocked with his fist, called, but no one answered. The house was empty. Ellie left without waiting for him. Jack leaned his forehead against the cold wood of the door, feeling despair creep in. She left. Maybe to a friend, maybe to relatives. He didn't know. All their belongings, photographs and souvenirs from her trips, carefully arranged by her, remained inside the house. Now all this has turned into decoration for a collapsed marriage. Jack sank down onto the steps, clutching his head. He dialed Ellie's number several more times, with no response. Wrote a message. Please talk to me. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I love you. Sent. Not a single read indicator. He sat for a long time until the winter cold penetrated his bones. In the end, realizing that he was now powerless to fix anything, he slowly walked back to the car. Meanwhile, Sarah opened the front door of her house and froze on the threshold. Right in front of the door stood her suitcase, hastily packed, and next to it was a large box. My heart sank. She bent down and peered. Inside the box were her things. Clothes folded somehow, shoes on top, a cosmetic bag, some kitchen utensils. All the little things that she had collected over the years in this house. My hands began to tremble. Sarah looked at the suitcase. The side pocket was open. Albums with photographs were sticking out of it. From her and Greg's wedding. There was a sheet of paper on the suitcase, pressed down with a stone. Sarah picked it up with trembling fingers. The short message, written in Greg's handwriting, read, Go away. I've packed my things. Don't thank me. G. Sarah felt her legs become weak. She sank onto the threshold, clutching the note to her chest. She felt a chill, as if the temperature around her had dropped to absolute zero. She looked over her shoulder at the familiar living room, the cozy sofa, the blanket she had given Greg last Christmas, the lamp they had chosen together. This was no longer her life. She was pushed out like a stranger. The sobs rose in my throat with renewed vigor. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, rocking like a lost child. She didn't know where to go. Parents' house is 1,000 miles away, girlfriend. But where are you going with this suitcase in the middle of winter? There was only one person left to whom she could still turn. Sarah pulled out her phone. My fingers didn't hit the buttons for a long time because of the tears. Finally, she called the right number. Jack. She sobbed as soon as he answered. He kicked me out. What should I do? Jack sat in the car in front of his empty house. Hearing her voice, he closed his eyes. There was emptiness and darkness inside. But he couldn't leave Sarah alone now. They had done this together, and now they could only rely on each other. Come to me, he said quietly into the phone. We'll think about it. He heard her cry, then a short, okay. Jack hung up the phone and leaned his head back against the headrest. The pain of loss did not subside, but at least he knew that he was not alone in this hell. Half an hour later, his car stopped again at Sarah's house. She was standing there on the porch with a suitcase next to her, a tear-stained face, drooping shoulders. Jack jumped out, loading her things into the trunk, then hugged Sarah, letting her cry on his chest. They silently got into the car. Neither one said a word the whole way. Each of them had nothing to say. Everything had already happened. It was getting dark when Jack brought Sarah to his place. The house was greeted with coldness and silence. Jack turned on the light and helped carry her things. Sarah looked around. Ellie's coat was still hanging on a hanger in the hallway, and photos of them together were on the shelf. She turned away, unable to look. Jack led her into the guest bedroom and awkwardly asked, "Would you like some tea?" Sarah just shook her head, sinking onto the edge of the bed with a deflated look. Jack realized that she wanted to be alone and retreated to the living room. He himself didn't want tea either. He wanted nothing more than to turn back time. But this was impossible. All that was left was an empty future, in which there was neither Ellie nor the usual comfort of their family life. In the meantime, he has a crying Sarah in his house, who also has nowhere else to go. Perhaps they are doomed to mend each other's broken pieces. But can they? Do the guilty have a right to consolation? Jack didn't know. He sat down heavily on the sofa, staring blankly at the wall. The nightmare continued, with no end in sight. A week has passed. The winter days dragged on endlessly, but for Ellie everything merged into a single vague stream. She took a leave of absence from work citing family reasons and moved in temporarily with her co-worker and friend Molly. She readily provided a guest room and surrounded Ellie with care without asking too many questions. Every day Ellie woke up with a heaviness in her chest. The first seconds after waking up, the consciousness was empty, but then a memory rolled in and the world collapsed again. However, a strange thing, every day I wanted to cry a little less. Emptiness replaced the acute pain, leaving only dull numbness. Jack called several times on the first day, then sent messages. Ellie didn't answer any of them. She ended up blocking his number. She warned her parents and close friends not to tell him her new address. Everyone understood her condition and supported her silently. Greg also didn't get in touch directly, but a couple of days after the incident, Ellie received a short message from him. "How are you?" She answered honestly, "I'm holding on." They didn't correspond again, but today he asked to meet in a cafe near her work. Ellie agreed. She herself wanted to see Greg and find out how he was doing. Music was playing quietly in the half-empty coffee shop. Ellie sat by the window, fiddling with a cup of cooling tea in her fingers. She arrived early and noticed that she was still nervous in public. It seemed to her that everyone around her knew about her shame. Of course, this was not the case. The people at the neighboring tables were immersed in their own affairs. The door creaked, letting in the frosty air and the hurrying Greg. He noticed Ellie and nodded. He looked a little better than a week ago, but still haggard. A faint yellow-green trace of a former bruise was visible under the eye. Ellie stood up for the meeting, and they awkwardly hugged, like old friends brought together by misfortune. "It's good to see you," Greg said quietly, sitting down opposite him. "Me too," Ellie responded. The waitress took Greg's order coffee without sugar and retreated, leaving them alone. They were silent for several seconds, not knowing where to start. "How are you?" Ellie finally asked. Greg shrugged. "It can be better, but I'll survive." He smiled slightly at the edge of his mouth. Ellie nodded. She understood him perfectly. "Are you home now?" She continued carefully. "Yes, I live alone." Greg ran his hand over the tabletop, lowering his gaze. "I didn't see Sarah again after that day. Did she try to contact me?" Ellie herself wasn't sure if she wanted to know. Greg clenched his hand into a fist. "I wrote to the mail a couple of times. Large letters, apologies, vows." He smiled joylessly. "I didn't answer. I immediately deleted it." Ellie exhaled. "Jack wrote to me too. Esme's email. I didn't read it. I don't see the point." Greg met her gaze. "So you firmly decided that I won't return to him?" "Yes," she finished, lowering her eyes to the cup. There is no excuse for this, and there is no forgiveness. Greg quietly slammed his fist on the table in agreement. Here we are in solidarity. The waitress brought him coffee, and they fell silent, waiting for her to leave. I've already filed for divorce, Greg said quietly, stirring his black coffee. Through a lawyer. There's nothing to hide. Ellie felt a pang of pain from the word divorce. But then she realized that there was no other way out. I think I should too, she said. I was waiting. Probably waiting I'd suddenly wake up, and it was a dream. Greg nodded understandingly. At first, I also didn't believe that everything was real. But it's better this way. Cut it off and move on with your life. Ellie smiled sadly. It's easy to say. I know, he sighed. It won't be easy, but we can handle it, right? He looked at her questioningly. Ellie thought for a second and nodded affirmatively. We'll manage. They drank their drinks in silence for a while. Outside the window, rare passers-by hurried through the snow. How is work? Greg suddenly asked, changing the subject. You took a break, right? Yes, at home for a week, Ellie answered. Or rather, not at home, at Molly's. I couldn't do it alone. She stopped short. Greg waved his hand in understanding. Everything is fine. I'm glad you're not alone. He took a sip of coffee and added, You know, I also moved to my parents for the weekend after everything. I didn't want to sit in an empty apartment. But then I decided, there's no point in running away. Returned to his home. And how? She asked softly. Greg smiled sadly. Quiet, but I'm getting used to it. Throw out the damn wedding photo. He shook his head. Yes, a lot of things. I'm slowly clearing the territory, so to speak. Ellie felt a familiar lump in her throat as she imagined taking their wedding photos off the walls. Until that moment, she had not dared to return to her house, even to get things. I can help you if you need to pick up things from the house, Greg suddenly said, as if he had read her thoughts. It's easier together. Ellie smiled gratefully. Thank you. Maybe, yes. One of these days I need to go while he's gone. Pick up clothes, documents. She swallowed. Even a simple listing hurts. I'm with you, just tell me, Greg confirmed seriously. Ellie suddenly realized how grateful she was that she had an ally in this nightmare. It would be better if nothing happened, but since that's the case, it's good not to be alone on the battlefield. You too, if anything, she began. I know, he nodded. Thank you. They finished their coffee and tea and talked a little more about everyday matters. They avoided mentioning the names of the former spouses as if they had decided by default there was no point. An hour later, they went outside together. As he said goodbye, Greg looked at Ellie intently. Hold on, okay? We will definitely celebrate when everything is settled. New life. The shadow of a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. Ellie felt a warm rush of sympathy for this wounded but resilient man. Let's celebrate, she agreed quietly. You take care of yourself too. Don't isolate yourself alone. I'll try, he replied. They hugged goodbye. This time Ellie felt the stubble on his cheek sting slightly. He hadn't shaved every day in a week, apparently. For some reason, this everyday detail touched her. Greg is also trying to look normal, but it's not easy for him. Ellie watched his figure disappear into the clouds of exhaust steam from a cold engine. Then she turned around and walked towards the metro. Her soul was still empty, but in this emptiness, something new was born, faint sparks of hope. If not for happiness, then at least for the fact that the pain will gradually subside and life will continue. The last step remains to be taken, to officially say goodbye to the past. Ellie clutched her phone in her pocket, making up her mind. Then she dialed the number of the lawyer whose contact Molly had given her. Hello. I would like to consult on divorce proceedings, she said quietly into the phone, stepping forward along the noisy street. There was an uneasy silence in Jack's house. It had been a couple of weeks since Sarah had moved in with him. During this time, their once passionate relationship seemed to fade under the onslaught of guilt and loss. Now they lived like two ghosts under one roof. Late at night, Jack sat on the couch in the living room, his eyes glued to the TV screen. Some kind of reality show was flickering with pictures, but he didn't understand a single frame. On the table nearby stood a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a glass. Jack smelled of alcohol. He was trying to drown out heavy thoughts. Sarah came out of the bedroom in her robe and stood hesitantly in the doorway of the living room. "Are you going to bed?" she asked quietly. Jack didn't react immediately. Only a few seconds later, noticing her figure with peripheral vision, he answered dully, "Not yet. You lie down." Sarah stood there for a moment, then approached hesitantly. She looked at the bottle, at Jack's haggard face. "Maybe that's enough already," she said softly. "This won't help." Jack grinned without looking at her. "What will help, Sarah? Any ideas?" There was fatigue and hidden aggression in his voice. Sarah cringed. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I'm just worried about you." "Funny," he snorted, finally meeting her eyes. "You should have been worried before." Sarah looked away. There was a tense pause between them. Finally, she spoke quietly. "We need to talk, Jack." "About what else?" he sighed, setting the glass aside. "It's all said and done." The bitterness in his words cut into her. "But with us, what's next?" she asked the tormenting question. "We are in all of this together. Maybe we should try to be each other's support?" Jack smiled wryly. "Support? Sorry, Sarah, but I can barely stand on my own right now." He stood up, swaying. Sarah instinctively stepped forward to support him, but he pulled away. "No need." "I'm fine," he muttered. Sarah bit her lip, trying to hold back her tears. It hurt her to see him like this, and even more painful because he was moving away. "You're mad at me, right?" she whispered. "Do you think it's all my fault?" Jack shook his head, rubbing his temples. "What does it have to do with it? I'm angry with myself, you know." His voice broke. "On myself, in this situation." He swept his hand around the room, his gaze falling on the photograph on the wall, him and Ellie, smiling happily on the beach a year ago. Jack turned away as if from a blow. "It would be better if I—" he began and stopped. Sarah became wary. "What?" "I wish I had held back then." He finally exhaled and looked her straight in the face. "It would be better if we didn't start all this, Sarah." His words hung in the air, heavy and merciless. Sarah turned pale. "Are you sorry for me?" she asked in a trembling voice. Jack said nothing, but everything was clear in the silence. Sarah covered her mouth to keep from crying. A different feeling flashed in her eyes, resentment. "You know, it's not easy for me either," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "I lost everything, just like you. But apparently you don't need me now either." Jack tiredly rubbed his face with his palms. "It's not a matter of needed or not needed. It's just, everything is wrong. We have done such a thing that now there can be no talk of any happiness." Sarah stepped closer. A desperate note sounded in her voice. "Why can't he? Yes, we are to blame, but maybe over time." "What about time?" he interrupted hotly. "Will Ellie forgive us? Will Greg forget? Will we forget this to ourselves?" He shook his head, tears flashed in his eyes, which he did not let go for a long time. "When I close my eyes, I see her face. Ellie, the way she looked at me then." He stopped short, swallowing a lump. Sarah was silent, tears flowing down her cheeks. She came almost close. "I feel bad too, Jack," she said. "I dream about Greg every night. I wake up and realize that I betrayed the only person who loved me for so long." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Jack instinctively hugged her, not so much out of tenderness as out of a sense of shared pain. Sarah buried herself in his chest, crying. "We both ruined everything," Jack whispered, stroking her back. "Forgive me. I probably gave you false hope." Sarah looked up at him with tear-stained eyes. "False?" Jack looked away. "I myself don't know now. What we have. Was it love or just avoiding problems?" Sarah quietly slipped out of his arms, retreating. Her gaze glazed over from new tears. "I see," she whispered. Now you think that you didn't love? Jack wanted to object, but hesitated. He himself couldn't figure it out. His feelings for Sarah were mixed with feelings of guilt for Ellie to such an extent that it was no longer possible to separate them. Sarah, was all he said pleadingly. I'm confused. Sorry. She sobbed and roughly brushed away her tears. Well, I'm sorry I was so naive. I thought we had something real. There was bitterness in her voice. Jack stepped towards her. Don't say that, he asked. I did not mean that. It's too late, she answered painfully. For several moments they stood opposite, broken, not knowing what to say. Then Sarah said quietly, Maybe I should leave. Jack took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He didn't answer directly, but silence was an answer in itself. Sarah smiled bitterly through her tears. Sure. She turned around and almost ran into the bedroom. A minute later, Jack heard the bathroom door slam. Apparently, she had locked herself in there to cry in private. Jack sank back onto the sofa and grabbed his head. He was shaking, either from drinking or from nervous tension. Everything inside was torn to pieces. He understood that his relationship with Sarah was bursting at the seams. The very people for whom they risked everything can now barely stand each other because everyone is reminded of what they did. The phone on the table lit up with an incoming call. Jack looked mechanically, unconsciously, hoping for a miracle that suddenly Ellie. No, a work colleague called. He threw the phone away and ran his hands over his face. Somewhere in the depths of their souls, a frightening thought arose. Perhaps the retribution for their sin is not even loneliness, but this pathetic semblance of a relationship corroded by regrets. The punishment is to be together, but have no future. Sarah's sons died down behind the wall. The house fell into an eerie silence. Jack threw his head back on the sofa and closed his eyes, allowing the heavy emptiness to completely overwhelm him. Another month later, the day came when Ellie decided to finally take her things from her previous home. She deliberately chose the time on a weekday, believing that Jack would not be there. Their lawyers had already settled the main issues of the divorce, and direct meetings could be avoided. Molly's friend volunteered to help with the move. They pulled up to the house around noon in a rented van. Ellie's heart was beating fast. It was hard to return here. There were no lights in the windows. The house looked empty. Are you ready? Molly asked quietly, touching her elbow. Ellie swallowed and nodded. She unlocked the door with her key. There was a slightly musty smell inside. It was obvious that no one had really lived here for a long time. Ellie walked into the living room. Everything was in its place, just as she had left it. Only on the mantelpiece were some photographs missing. Apparently, they had been removed. She did not specify which ones exactly. Going up to the bedroom, Ellie began putting clothes into boxes. Molly helped silently, without asking questions. Ellie was grateful for this tact. I'll take this out to the car, said the friend, picking up the filled box. Ellie nodded. When Molly disappeared downstairs, Ellie sat down on the edge of the bed, catching her breath. This is her bedroom, their bedroom. She glanced at the marital bed, at the bedside table, where her favorite lamp still stood. For a moment, a wave of sadness for the lost life came over me, but Ellie forced herself to get up and continue getting ready. At that moment, the front door slammed on the floor below. Ellie was wary. A second later, footsteps were heard on the stairs. Jack appeared in the bedroom doorway. He was without a jacket, in an unbuttoned coat, as if he had rushed in hastily. The face is drawn, there are shadows under the eyes. When he saw Ellie, he froze for a moment. You came, he breathed. Ellie felt everything tighten inside her, but she maintained her outward calm. I'm taking my things, she said evenly. It seems you should be at work. Jack ran his hand through his hair. I took a day off. I felt that you would come. So he was lying in wait on purpose. Ellie clutched the tape in her hand, which she had used to seal the boxes. For what? She asked quietly. Jack took a few steps deeper into the room. I wanted to talk. To see you. Ellie looked away. We have nothing to talk about, Jack. Everything is decided. He came closer, now standing on the other side of the bed, opposite her. Please, Elle. His voice trembled at her name. Can I at least apologize? Ellie smiled bitterly. Apologize? Do you think this will change anything? Jack was silent, his shoulders slumped. He looked broken. I'm so sorry, he said hoarsely. I know it's unforgivable. But I need to say this. I am extremely sorry that I ruined our happiness. Not a day goes by that I don't ask myself, why did I do this? And I don't find the answer. I destroyed my own future with my own hands, and now I have to live with it. If only I could turn back time. I lost everything, Ellie. Sarah and I broke up almost immediately after that incident. She left, and I was left alone. Absolutely alone. Ellie shook her head bitterly. Should I feel sorry for you? His confession about breaking up with Sarah did not cause any feelings in her, neither relief nor regret. It didn't matter to her anymore. There was silence. Footsteps were heard downstairs. Molly probably returned with another box and realized what was happening, so she didn't get up. Jack walked around the bed and knelt down in front of Ellie, who was still standing at the edge, her hands clasped tightly. Forgive me, he whispered, raising his eyes to her. I understand that I don't deserve it. But now that I haven't lived a day in peace since that. Ellie recoiled, took a step back, forcing him to rise from his knees. Seeing him in this position was unbearable and absurd. Don't humiliate yourself, Jack, she said evenly. You made your choice. He stood up with his head down. Tears glistened on his eyelashes. I lost everything. You, yourself, respect. The voice broke. There is nothing left. Ellie felt a strange calm, almost indifference to these words. I also have nothing left, thanks to you, she answered. But now I need to move on with my life. And constantly trying to make me feel sorry for you will not help either you or me. Jack closed his eyes, tears still flowing down his cheeks. He quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. I just wanted, he began. What? Ellie raised her eyebrows. To hear that I forgive you. Jack was silent. Ellie straightened up to her full height and continued firmly, looking him straight in the face. This won't happen. There is no forgiveness. Not now, not later. He closed his eyes at her cold words as if from a slap in the face. But Ellie was not going to relent. She paid too dearly for this moment. I won't forgive, she repeated quietly but clearly, live with it. Jack nodded several times, lowering his head. A sob escaped his chest. I understand, he muttered. You deserve better. I'll never forgive myself, Ellie. She remained silent. She suddenly felt stuffy in this room where she had once been so happy. I wanted to leave as quickly as possible. Ellie walked around the frozen Jack and headed towards the door. On the threshold, she turned around for a moment. He stood in the same place, broken, alone, among the boxes of her things. Once upon a time, the sight of his pain would have torn her heart. But now she felt only emptiness and fatigue. Goodbye, Jack, she said quietly. He raised his head, trying to catch her gaze, but Ellie had already walked out into the corridor. Going downstairs, she met the worried gaze of Molly, who was holding another box. Everything is fine? She asked in a whisper. Yes, let's go, Ellie answered curtly. They quickly took out the remaining things and closed the door behind them. Once Ellie got into the van, she couldn't resist looking at the front of the house. Someone's shadow flashed in the bedroom window. Perhaps Jack was watching them go. She looked away and said to her friend, Edema. Molly nodded, starting the engine. As the car drove away, Ellie took a farewell look at the place where the best years of her life had passed. The pain resonated somewhere deep, but on top of it lay armor, a calm feeling of completion. It's over, and ahead, whatever it may be, a new stage awaits. No lies, no change, without Jack, and apparently without forgiveness. Spring has brought with it a long-awaited update. With the last snowfalls, the most difficult experiences of winter went away. Ellie noted to herself that more and more often she wakes up without chest pain, but with quiet calm. Sometimes I even caught myself smiling, looking at the morning sun outside the window of my new apartment. Her divorce from Jack was made official in early March. She received the documents by mail without unnecessary meetings. It was strange to be free again, to bear my maiden name. But at the same time, this became the final point. Greg also successfully divorced Sarah. The process went relatively smoothly. Fortunately, they did not have common children or much property. She and Ellie exchanged a couple of messages, supporting each other at this stage, but had not seen each other in person since the day of the division of property. Both were busy creating a new life. And so, when the hitch was over, Greg remembered his promise to celebrate a new life. He called Ellie and invited her to dinner at a small cozy restaurant where the four of them had once gone in groups. Now it was his and Greg's evening. Ellie was a little nervous entering the familiar hall of this small restaurant, with candles on the tables and soft jazz music. How many times have they been here before, together with their spouses? Now everything is different. But as soon as Greg stood up to meet her with a friendly smile, the anxiety disappeared. He looked noticeably better. He had cut his hair, shaved neatly, and put on a new jacket. In the eyes, although there is a tinge of sadness, there is also a glimmer of warmth. "Hello," he helped her take off her light coat. "Glad to see you." "Me too," she smiled back. "You look great." Greg was a little embarrassed, but it was clear that he was pleased with the compliment. "You too," he said, looking at her. Ellie wore a light spring dress today and felt beautiful for the first time in a long time. They sat down at a table by the window. We ordered a glass of dry Merlot and light snacks, bruschetta and salad. Well, Greg raised his glass when their order was brought, with the end of our epic. Ellie clinked glasses with it, taking a small sip. "Happy new chapter," she said softly. "How do you like freedom?" Greg asked with a smile. Ellie thought and answered honestly. "I don't know yet. A little scary, to be honest, but it also inspires." Greg nodded. "Likewise, I suddenly realized that now nothing was stopping me, for example, from taking off to travel somewhere. I used to put everything off." "Great," Ellie supported him. "You deserve to unwind." "I decided to go fishing with my father this May," he shared. "We were about 15 years old when we last went out together." Ellie smiled. "I think it's wonderful." They had a leisurely dinner, talking about neutral and positive topics. Greg said that he had taken on a new project at work. Ellie shared how her yoga course was going, where she signed up for peace of mind. Neither Jack nor Sarah were mentioned by name. Only once did Greg say, "I heard Jack sold your house." Ellie tensed slightly, but still asked, "Is it true?" "My realtor friend said that a house very similar to his appeared on our street." I immediately thought. Greg stopped. In general, he apparently left. Ellie digested what she heard. It's strange, but the news about her now ex-husband didn't hurt her much. "Well, it's probably better that way," was all she said. Greg nodded in understanding. Then, after a pause, he added, "I haven't seen Sarah either. I know that she went to her sister in Florida. He'll probably start over there." Ellie didn't answer. The topic has exhausted itself. She looked at Greg, who was studying the pattern on the glass, clearly also not wanting to talk about the past anymore. "You know," she said quietly, changing the subject, "I thought that I would never be able to trust men again." Greg looked up, listening intently. "And then I met your mother." Ellie smiled a little slyly. Greg raised his eyebrows in surprise. "With my mother?" Ellie nodded. "She came to my bank the other day on business. She recognized me, and we started talking. Such a nice woman. She said that she has a wonderful son." Greg snorted, blushing. "Oh God, I hope I didn't say anything unnecessary." "No, don't worry," Ellie laughed. "But after talking with her, I thought, the world is not hopeless. There are good people, good families, and I probably will be able to too." She paused, searching for a word. Greg finished softly. "Can you trust?" Ellie lowered her eyes and nodded. "It's not easy," he admitted. "I'm still digging into myself. But I think we can handle it." "We'll definitely cope together," she said, and she added shyly, "I mean, supporting each other. Like friends." Greg looked at her carefully, warmly. Yes, sure. As friends, he confirmed quietly. Something more than just friendly silence hung between them, but neither of them began to break it. Dinner was coming to an end. They asked for the bill. Greg wouldn't let Ellie pay, insisting it was his invitation. Thank you, she said, going out with him onto the porch of the restaurant. It was a good evening. I really needed to get out too, Greg admitted. Thank you for coming. They stopped next to each other under the spring evening sky. The maple trees rustled with young leaves and smelled of freshness. Ellie suddenly felt lightness of being for the first time in a very long time. Greg turned to her. Elle, I'm glad to see you so. Alive. Smiling. She felt the color touch her cheeks. You're the one who made me laugh today. She waved him off. We will continue to try, he smiled. They just looked at each other for a few seconds. Then Greg suggested with slight doubt. Maybe we can go for a walk. The night is warm. Go ahead, Ellie readily agreed. They moved along a quiet street nearby, slowly. Greg quietly put his hands in his pockets so as not to be tempted to take her hand. Ellie took a deep breath of the spring air and caught herself thinking that she was feeling good now. Without looking back, it's just good next to a loved one. She glanced at his profile out of the corner of her eye and smiled at the corners of her lips, feeling that there would definitely be many more bright days ahead. Summer was coming to an end. Life gradually returned to its normal course. Ellie worked, met with friends, and went to the movies or outdoors with Greg on weekends. Their friendship grew stronger and gradually developed into something warmer, although both were in no hurry to define the relationship. They just felt good together without further ado. One evening in August, after returning from work, Ellie checked the mailbox of her new apartment. Among the bills and advertising brochures, she found an envelope without a return address. But from the handwriting on the inscription, Ellie Wilson, she recognized Jack's hand. My heart trembled. This was the first direct message from him since the spring. She stood in the hallway, holding the envelope, and did not know whether she wanted to open it. Over the past months, the wounds have almost healed. Was it worth bothering them? Plucking up her courage, Ellie carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several folded sheets. She sat down on the sofa and began to read. Dear Ellie, the beginning read, I don't know if I have the right to address you like this. I'm writing this letter because you don't want to see me personally, but it's important for me to say what's in my heart. First of all, I apologize. I know you will not forgive, and you will do the right thing. But I need to say this. I am extremely sorry that I ruined our happiness. Not a day goes by that I don't regret. I get stuck asking myself, why did I do this? And I don't find the answer. I destroyed my own future with my own hands, and now I have to live with it. I sold the house and moved out of state. Now I live in a small town in Virginia and work in a car repair shop. I started all over again from scratch, without acquaintances, without friends. I go to a psychologist trying to figure out how I ended up doing this. I don't make excuses, I have no excuse. But maybe someday I'll understand something about myself and become better, even though it's too late. Sarah and I are no longer together. As you said then, nothing good awaited us. Very soon after that scene, we realized that we had acted badly and could not be together. She returned to her family. I hope she manages to find her way and be happy someday. You are probably already living a different life too. You may not hate me as fiercely as you did in the early days, but you won't remember the good things either. I deserve it. I'm not asking you for anything, Ellie. Just wanted to let you know that you were the best thing in my life. And with my betrayal, I destroyed not only our marriage, but also my former self. I will never forgive myself for this and will carry this burden until the end of my days. May everything be fine with you. You are strong, kind, beautiful, you deserve happiness. I am not worthy, but I still wish it for you with all my heart. Thank you for the years that we were together. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, I know. There's no forgiveness, it's just, sorry, the word goes with it. Be happy, please. And goodbye. Always loved you. J. Ellie finished reading the letter and a quiet sigh escaped her lips. Strange, but she didn't cry. She just sat silently for a long time, looking at the lines written with a trembling hand. She truly felt sorry for the broken man Jack had become. Guilt and regret flowed from every sentence. Once upon a time, she wanted him to suffer the same way she suffered, and so it seems that this is what happened. But there was no relief from this. She didn't enjoy his pain, not one bit. On the contrary, now, holding the letter, Ellie felt that she had long ago let go of her resentment. All that remained was a quiet regret that their happy love story ended so sadly. She carefully folded the letter back. I didn't want to write any answer, and there was no need to. The past is the past. Ellie went out onto the balcony with a cup of green tea, letting the cool evening air cool her thoughts. A silver bracelet flashed on her wrist, Greg's gift for her recent birthday. He knew she didn't like gold, so he chose dainty silver with a little pattern. The memory of this made her smile. She thought about Jack's words, "Be happy." Previously, such a wish would have irritated with its belated nobility, and now, well, she is really diligently building her happiness, step by step. And perhaps she was close to one day even forgiving. No, not out loud and not in person. Inwardly, let go of the past completely. Do not keep the stone in your bosom. Ellie understood that it was not Jack who needed this, she herself needed it, so that one day, waking up next to someone she can trust again, she won't remember with pain about old wounds. Greg quietly came out onto the balcony. He had come to visit her in the evening, fiddling with dinner in the kitchen while she was sorting out the mail. Seeing the letter in her hands and the expression on her face, he asked worriedly, "Everything is fine." Ellie turned to him, smiling softly. "Yes, just a letter from Jack." Greg became wary. "Anything wrong?" "No, he's saying goodbye," she answered calmly. Greg came closer and, after hesitating for a second, lightly put his arm around her shoulders. Ellie felt his warm, reliable presence nearby and closed her eyes. "How are you?" he asked quietly. She turned her head, meeting his gaze with his gray, full of sympathy eyes. And suddenly I realized that my soul was truly at peace. "I'm fine," she said confidently. "Is it true?" Greg nodded and smiled slightly. "Glad to hear." They were silent for a moment, enjoying the closeness. Somewhere in the distance, the first star flashed in the dark sky. Ellie took a deep breath. "You know," she said, surprised at her own words, "it seems to me that I will still be able to forgive someday." Greg raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Not for him, for myself," she explained, to go further lightly. He smiled knowingly and hugged her tighter. "You are strong and kind. You can do it." Ellie smiled sadly at the corners of her lips. "I just don't want to drag the past along with me anymore. It's not worth it." Greg didn't answer, only a warming kiss touched her temple. Ellie laid her head on his shoulder. The letter in her hand no longer burned with pain, it became just a letter. She thought that the past was finally letting her out of its clutches. And the future. The future beckoned with uncertainty, but there was a person nearby with whom she felt calm. And this was enough to face a new day without fear. Autumn smoothly flowed into winter, closing the year-round cycle of changes in Ellie's life. Exactly a year ago, her world collapsed, and now a new one has been built on the rubble, different, but strong and honest. Saturday morning turned out to be quiet and gentle. Pale winter light filtered through the curtains. Ellie woke up to the cozy smell of freshly brewed coffee. She stretched under the warm blanket and smiled. These aromas meant that Greg was already up and doing magic in the kitchen. In the spacious, bright kitchen of their new home in a quiet suburb, Greg, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, was just putting an omelet on plates. Hearing her steps, he turned around and smiled, that calm, reliable smile that she loved so much. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he teased. "In about 5 minutes, breakfast will be ready." "Good," she responded, coming closer. "It smells so good." Greg hugged her with one arm and kissed her on the cheek. "I tried especially for you. How did you sleep?" Ellie nodded, settling down next to her and looking at the frying pan. "Like a child." I haven't slept so sweetly for a long time. It's all yoga in the evenings, he joked. Oh, and off to sleep. She laughed quietly. Here it is an ordinary good morning, without hidden tensions, without understatements. How many such mornings they still had ahead of them, and she rejoiced at each one. Together they set the table. Rare snowflakes slowly swirled outside the window. The city was still dozing on the weekend. Ellie glanced at Greg opposite him, how he was intently spreading jam on toast, and suddenly realized that there was warm, real happiness in her chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, noticing her gaze. Ellie smiled at the corners of her lips. "Yes, so, it's just good." Greg reached across the table, and she placed her hand in his. No words were needed, they already understood what they had gone through and where they had come. Ellie remembered the old phrase, "Whatever happens is for the better." She would never have believed a year ago that she could say that, but now, perhaps there was some truth to this. Pain, betrayal, anger, everything is in the past. She no longer held a grudge against anyone. This burden dissolved along the way as soon as she opened her heart to new happiness. And although the scars from her experience never went away, they no longer defined her. Ellie knew that she still had many discoveries ahead, and she was ready to face them without fear. Greg squeezed her hand slightly, getting her attention. "A penny for your thoughts," he said curiously. Ellie shook her head, smiling wider. "I'm just happy," she said quietly. "Thank you." A warm caress flashed in his eyes. "Thank you," he replied, "because you believe me again. You believe people." Ellie felt a slight trembling in her soul from joy, from love, from the realization of how far she had come. She stood up, walked up to him, and hugged him tightly. "Everything will be fine with us," she whispered. Greg wrapped his arms around her, hugging her securely and carefully. "Of course it will," he agreed. "It can't be otherwise." So they stood in the middle of the cozy kitchen, where the clock was quietly ticking and the omelet was cooling on the plates. Outside the window, a new day was beginning, bright, peaceful, promising only good things. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.